So I have talked a lot about the problem with understanding spelling of names when you're doing genealogy research. So if you haven't heard that, this will be new to you. If you have, we're back to the same thing I've said before, but I'll say it again. Everybody has a problem with their names being misspelled. Your name can be Smith, and I will guarantee you somewhere in the records it's misspelled. Okay. One of the things you learn doing genealogy research is to live with it. As a matter of fact, if anything, to have fun with it. Okay. We're dealing with the Myers family later today, Myers. Okay. Meyers, Moyers, Meyer, etc., and even more variations than that. Why? First of all, the name just simply may have variations. In the McKinney clan, if you went north, you spelled it with Kenney. If you went south, you spelled it Kinney. Don't ask me why. That's just what happened. Government agents don't always hear clearly when you're speaking Polish. They're trying to figure out what is it you're saying, and they'll write down the best job they can of that. And you may choose not to keep a name that is somewhat awkward. Okay, so if your name is Boleslaw, you may say William is a lot better. It's easier for people to remember. When you go do your research, rule is to always write down the way it's spelled in the document. Okay, your job is not say, oh, I know that's wrong. Your job is to say, oh, that's an interesting variant. I wonder if I can keep that. To remember it. For one thing, that way you can find it again. Some websites let you correct an error. If they do, it's your job to do that. So, spelling variations, look for ethnic problems, use iterative searching. You find it, you now use that as one of the names you search on. Okay. Other tricks. If you're having trouble finding people, look for neighbors, look for family members. My wife's grandfather's name was Kotkovsky, K-O-T-K, blah. Okay. I never could find him in the dang 1920 census, okay, until I started looking for his kids. And then I found a household that had everybody that was correct, okay? It just happened to be spelled C-H-O-T. So any search routine you're doing is slow to find a different first letter. Then there are a couple of other things we'll talk about briefly. Married women is one of the favorite ones. So alternate spellings, phonetic spelling. Robert can be Rupert. Truncated spelling. My wife's grandmother was Bardzikowska, which became Bardzik, and in one branch of the family, Bard. When I kept looking in the telephone directories in Massachusetts to find more Bardzikowskis, not a lot of luck. I finally found the family that told me it was the Bards I was looking for. Simple alternate spellings. Veronica can be a C or a K. Jean or John. Which Francis is it? Truncated. JNO in many historic records in America is the abbreviation for John. Not very obvious until you run into it. In a lot of languages, there's a male-female last name difference. So the men are Bardzikowski, the women are Bardzikowska. You can search all day for Peter Bardzikowska, and you ain't gonna find him. because he's Bardzikowski, of course, because he's a man. And then if you're doing Spanish, you'll learn that the names are reversed. So you have to be very careful to understand which name you're searching on. First names. It's called often the Scottish Convention, but it's actually in a lot of different cultures. Oldest male child is named after the father's father. Oldest female child is named after the mother's mother. ... down the uncles and aunts. Well, that worked fine in the early 1830s when you had a lot of deaths. When you got around to 1890 and you had 12 kids, 8 men, and the next generation, you no kidding, had 8 Johns. Okay. People sometimes use a christening name, not a birth name. So records may be in a different name, even though they're the same person. In France or Quebec, Marie is used quite frequently when you are christened. And then, of course, heaven knows if you come from Scandinavia or Greece, who knows? Anglicization can come because you want it. My grandmother explained carefully that her grandmother's maiden name was Mooney, spelled Mauney. And I said, Mamaw, whatever you say, and wrote it down. Well, it turned out that she was German. The original family was Muni, Muni. They kept the pronunciation but changed the spelling. Some names are automatically changed. Okay, if I'm Jorge, I become George. That's pretty logical. Sometimes there's standardization. My sister did a lot of history in colonial America. She's a historian. And one of her favorites was discovering that in the tax records, the Schmidts were all spelled Smith. Same people, lived the same place. But the result of that was all the early studies of Philadelphia showed that the Germans were all poor. They didn't own property because only the Smiths owned property. Women. Women have a habit of using a name that happens to be the one they want to use at the moment. It may be their maiden name, their first marriage name. Very frequent for people who have a very late second marriage. A living with name. If you are not technically married and you're living with someone and your local postmaster comes around to take the census, you're going to identify yourself as living in sin, or are you going to say, I'm his wife? And what name is used when you remarry varies all over the map. Children can often appear with their stepfather's name, at least for a census or two. And if you think about it, if you're a census taker, you walk into a household, you start taking the roll, you stop and say, well, is John your son? People often will just write down the same last name, unless somebody tells you something different. First names often run from generation to generation. So I was able to split out a bunch of McKinneys from the other McKinneys because mine are the ones who used John, William, and Joseph. And the other McKinneys used Colin, Alex, Archibald, Daniel, okay, consistently, generation after generation. But I know if I ran into a Colin McKinney, it wasn't one of mine. Notice if you do research in America prior to 1900, that you may find records that say John Smith Sr. and John Smith Jr. we fall in the habit of saying, well, that's just dad and his kid. Often it's just the older person and the younger person with the same name. That's what the census taker would write down. So sort of obvious, first names can have special meaning. They can be named after famous people. They can be named after a wealthy neighbor who you hope will give the child something good on the christening day. They can be named after an earlier child who died. They can be named after a favorite uncle. Nicknames, what's nicknames? And don't fall into the habit of thinking that a nickname has to be associated with just one real name. For years, I wondered about the nickname Polly in my family, and I discovered that there were Marthas who used Polly as a nickname, where I'd always thought it was Mary's. It is. And remember that middle names will sometimes be the most important thing in somebody's. My mother was Lida Lucille when she was born. Never used the name Lida. You would never find her looking. You would not know to look for her as Lida in something like a birth record. Okay, so you have new information, new family members, new spelling, new locations. That's something you go back and research again, because now you can find something you hadn't found before. I found a couple of the Myers I was looking at by adding that E, M-E-Y. Okay, that's all I wanted to cover on names today, because I have a ton of stuff on brick walls. Any questions? If you're on the Zoom and have a question, you're welcome to unmute and ask it. Okay, brick walls. When you're trying to get through a brick wall, these are some of the things I do. I start with the last person we know and repeat all the research on that person that I can. I'm looking to fill in every last dot of information for that person, okay? Because I'm going to find something, and you'll see through these examples, I'm going to find something that I didn't catch earlier. I get all the censuses. As a matter of fact, I get, let's say I get uptight if I can't get all the censuses. Okay, I work and work and work and work. And you'll see there's some funny examples today that we'll talk about. Watch out for everybody knows. We're going to have an amazing example of everybody knows today. Mary. Something that isn't true. Everywhere possible, go back to the original documents. You'd know that's something I talk about all the time, but more and more is online, and you can do it more and more. And quite often, you couldn't do it 10 years ago or 5 years ago. So when you're repeating this research, it's an opportunity to go back and look at an original document. And be sure your geographic locations are accurate as of the time. The question here is, would Ancestry have a hint if something new were added? And the answer is possibly, okay, but not necessarily. Okay, well, again, some examples we can use today. Okay, I have an example of a misspelling that I can spot because I'm going through a database that I hadn't expected to go through. Okay. And make a list of common family names, first names, last names, spellings, everything. And be particularly alert for unusual names. We're going to work today with the name, first name, Littleton. Okay. Not very common. Okay. And in trying to distinguish in the Morris family, between the Williams, it's sure nice to look at the Littletons because there aren't many of them. So you find breakthroughs in marriage, birth, and death records, but often because you're looking carefully at spellings and dates that you may have missed before. You're searching records for the correct location. You're searching siblings and their spouses. When you have a brick wall, all of those siblings become really meaty material for you. You want to spend a lot of time looking at the siblings. And church records. And that's something else that's coming online that was not there 5-10 years ago. American Ancestors is putting almost all the Catholic records for the Diocese of Boston, online. Okay, I mean, 5 years ago, you'd have had to beg for them, probably write the church you thought was the right one, and hope that somebody would take the time to help look it up for you. A few other thoughts. Marriages almost always take place between people who know each other. The mythology of the man who comes into town riding on the horse and walks out with the girl the next week later, that may happen. But what's much more likely is you've grown up together, you've gone to the same church together, you've been schooled together, and at some point you say, oh, I like you. Marriages almost always take place at the bride's residence. So when you're looking for the location of a marriage, think about, where's the bride from? When you find the marriage, rather than the common thing, which is to look first at the man's surname, look at the bride's surname. See if you can locate her family. Well known, but just to repeat for the nth time, people rarely move to a place where they don't know anybody. They almost always move with someone else or move to a place where they know someone. I've used this example before, but I'll use it again. My wife's grandmother came over at age 19 from Poland to Providence, Rhode Island. Found her in a boarding house there. Got it. As I did more research, she came from a small town, maybe 200 people in Poland. And I found someone with the same village listed on their Ellis Island record. And as he was entering the country, his name, his wife's name, his oldest child who was born in the United States, and then his second child. And I said, oh, he's been here before. And what I eventually found out was he lived in the house that my wife's grandmother came to live in. He came here, he went home to that village, he talked to her, and she came over here to live with the other people there. And there are specific websites, we'll hit a couple today, that are much better than others at specific problems. And you want to think about those. Okay, example one, Catherine Carpenter. Catherine lived in the 19th century. The brick wall is, her husband died in 1849 and she remarried. Nobody knows who her husband was. And nobody's quite sure who her parents were. So what do we know? She died in Windsor, Broome County, New York. That's up near Binghamton, that area. Her first husband had died in 1849. So the first thing I did was the census records. 1850, she's the head of the household. 1860, she's living with her son, and her name is now listed as Catherine Brink, not Catherine Dibble. So a couple of thoughts. She must have married a Mr. Brink. That's who her second husband is. But she's listed as married. even though she's not, doesn't have a husband with her. 1865, we have a New York State census. And if you're from New York State, you love the New York State censuses for lots of reasons, including they often tell you where people were born. But it shows he was married. She was married twice. So that's for sure. So her possible husband was William Burke. How do I think that? Well, in the 1850 census for Broome County, there are only two people with the last name Brink, Cornelius and William, who are of the right age to potentially have married her. Cornelius's family is well researched. You open up Ancestry, you get a whole data dump of family. His wife lived forever. William's wife died in 1852. So he continues to live. The various places he shows up suggest his financial and or other condition was declining. So you can easily come to the conclusion that he's likely to have been her second husband, Carpenter. So the last name Carpenter is confirmed through her daughter Catherine's death certificate, who lists her mother's maiden name. And that's the old trick of looking at the last to die of the children, because then they're more likely to have a complete death record. In 1865, two of her sons are listed as having been in Schoharie County, not Broome County. And in the 1810 census for Schoharie, there's only one Carpenter. And John, he's there in the 1820 census too. Okay, we know that she was born in 1802, so we find her in that household possible. Can't guarantee it. There is another ancestry family that shows John Carpenter with the son Burton, and Burton's daughter Sarah Ann married Jacob McLeod, and their son was born in Windsor, Broome, New York. So do we recognize Windsor, Broome? That's the same village where our family was. And then this family moved about 10 miles away. So we have promising answers for both questions. It would require more research because you look for a lot of confirming research, but I think we have a direction to go in for both. William Morris. So William Morris, we think, was born in 1791, died in 1845. The question we've got is, his brother Henry has an extensive family. They've done extensive research, and they are convinced, probably the first to be born, but Henry was born in the 1790s, and that William was the fourth born, which doesn't work well because we believe William was married in 1816. If he was the fourth born in that family, he would have been born after 1800. That doesn't work. So the question is, how do we resolve this conflict? Last thing we know is two of their children who lived into the census period where people recorded the state of birth say they were born in Missouri in 1824 and 1826. Okay, so that pretty much says that family was in Missouri, you know, pretty much in the 1820s. The father was George Morris. He died in 1844 in Andrew County, Missouri. And in fact, the reason we know that is because William, the ancestor we're tracing, was in fact the executor of the estate. So hard to argue that one. Henry's records say he was born in 1796 in North Carolina. Littleton was born in 1801 in North Carolina. He's another brother. So When we look at William's census records, two of his children were born in Missouri in the 1820s. But there is no 1820 census for Missouri because it didn't become a state until 1821. So we don't know quite when they moved there, but if they were married in 1816, they were there by 1824. But in the 1830 census, there is a William Morris in Montgomery County. And if you look at the children he had, they pretty much match the children we believe William had. So we're on the right track. And in 1840, he's the same place. And in both records, it's clear that William was born between 1790 and 1800. But there are no Morris family members listed in Andrew County in 1840. But one of the reasons is because that was Indian territory up until 1837, and very fragmentary records come in the 1840 census. So this is the record and family search, and I want to ask you to run your eyes, but if you enlarge this and look at it carefully, one of the lines on there is William Morris. Now, what's nice about family search is it has a ability to correct for contrast and for brightness. So there's been a lot of correction here, and that's brought out a lot of the records. For example, this is what you're going to see if you go to Ancestry, because they don't have that capability. Okay, and I will tell you, not only can't you read the numbers, they indexed it as Amos Morris, not William Morris. Okay, and I must say, if I look at that record, I could bet Amos just as easily as I could bet William. Okay, so one of the things to remember with census records is family search lets you adjust brightness and contrast. So what you do, you make that adjustment and then you hit apply, and it applies to that record thereafter. So that gives you a tremendous ability to improve what are basically bad records. So Clyde has gone to, this is Clyde's family. Clyde has a DNA test. So we go on the DNA and we go looking for other descendants of George Morris. We find 4 people on GEDmatch. GEDmatch is an auxiliary DNA site that does a really interesting thing. It lets you search the site for people whose trees include a particular person. So you could search for Henry Morris, and we found 4 people whose DNA had been on GEDmatch. And glory be, Clyde doesn't match any of them. So that was, it doesn't raise the question, are Henry and William actually descended from the same person, right? But it's important to remember the time you get to 4th cousins, matching DNA is about 50%. 2nd cousins is almost 100. 3rd cousins is 90. 4th cousins is 50. 5th cousins is good luck. And then we found this record. So in looking at all of the records of Andrew County, Clyde had a list of records that his cousin had copied years ago, going to the county courthouse, going in and looking for everything, but she'd missed one, which is now on Ancestry. Okay, and this is a document for the administrator of the will. Okay, and here, I don't know if you can read it, the deceased died without sin. He left 6 children, to wit, Henry, Littleton, Nancy, William, Elizabeth, and George. ... Henry resides in Iowa, which we know. Littleton in Kentucky, which we know from other documents. So there is no question whatsoever. This is the same father. Okay? Doesn't get more clear than that. Yeah, and there was a long period where people felt that he was the fourth, William was the fourth. Look at the list here: Henry, Littleton, Nancy, William. So in most wills, the most common sequence of names for children is birth order, except when it's not. So you can't quite depend on it. Although in one of my personal situations, which involved trying to find a child who appeared to be the child of William and Elizabeth Gatliff, it turned out to be their grandchild. He doesn't appear in a critical document at all, which makes you really wonder why. And we figured out why eventually. So, given we had a common George Morris, and given that Littleton was born in 1801 in North Carolina, we're going to look at the 1800 census in North Carolina and see what we can find. And we find there are 3 listings for a George Morris. 2 involve very elderly men. The third shows 1 male, 26 to 44, 1 male, 10 to 15, 2 under 10. The 2 under 10 could easily be Henry and William. So this could be, okay, we haven't proven yet, the right family. And that's, we can conclude William was born between 1790 and 1800. His father was George. Henry and Littleton were brothers. He moved to Missouri before 1823 and Andrew County about 1840. Okay, any questions yet? Okay, number 3. Was William Turner's mother from Ireland? This is the one you sent me. Okay. So John Turner married a Mary Giblin. Family lore says she was Irish, but had no evidence to prove or disprove that. Now here I go to Find My Past. Find My Past has much better British records than Ancestry and Family Search. Okay, it's their shtick. They are really into extensive British records. And we said we're going to search for Mary Giblin, focused on marriages, and try to find her parents and trace them. So if you go to Family Search and you search for a marriage by Mary Giblin, what you're going to find is an 1864 marriage. The way they do it in the official British records that have been indexed is by calendar quarter. They're indexed, and you have to cross-index the name of the possible spouse. They don't list them in the same record. So Family Search, being good, thoughtful people, have done that for us. They've said Mary's probable spouse was John Turner, but that's not because that's what is in the database. It's because somebody has taken the trouble to figure these things out. Okay. Nothing there, right? We do have a location, Sculcoats in Yorkshire. However, when we go to Find My Past, they have a more extensive database. So we put in Mary Giblin, year of birth, and they start having a long list of Mary Giblins. And when we go down and find marriages in 1864, we find this record. This is the record from the church ceremony. So all of a sudden, we have John Turner, Mary Giblin, bachelor and spinster, okay? And who is her father? Michael. We've got a dad. We can work with the dad, okay? By the way, if we didn't know it, note that the witnesses included Mary Claire Turner, so that undoubtedly is a John Turner relationship. I don't know enough to know who, but so now we go census diving. And this is in the 1871. Remember, we just got married in 1864. So we're going to be in this location probably in 1871. And here we have, if you read down the left-hand column, Michael Giblin and his wife, and John Turner and his wife, Mary, in the same census record. And now is when we smile because this is a British census. And what it has on the right-hand side is where everybody was born. Mary was born in Yorkshire, but her dad was born in Ireland. So now we know. We can prove that Mary's ancestry is from Ireland. Now, I just did a tiny bit of additional research. There are other Giblins in this location, and my guess is there was a family that moved over there. Okay. And Michael, turns out, probably came from Galway, okay, from another record. But anyway, here we are. Okay, Petrus Myers, Peter Myers. So, Mary, you ready? This, as we all said back at one point, this is your life. No, this has all been recorded. You can get. So, what do we know? We have a Peter Myers. Mary has a Peter Myers, who lived from 1795 to 1870 and was buried in Churchill, Frederick County, Maryland. He married Rebecca Fortney in September of 1820. And a lot of people think that his father was Petrus Myers, born in Mud Run, Adams County, Pennsylvania in 1769. We also believe the family was German Lutheran. Okay. So I went on to Ancestry, and for those who use Ancestry regularly, you can go look at their family trees. And I searched for Peter Meyer, died in 1839. I got 755 trees that have that person, okay? Which is interesting. And it's based on this. In the St. Mary's Cemetery, Silver Run, Carroll County, Maryland, we have Peter Myers and his death. And the transcriber, and if you look at the tombstone, say he died in 1839. But if he was born in the 1760s, how would he have been about 66 years old? So this was bugging me. So what I did was I found that St. Mary's is associated with the St. Mary's Evangelical Lutheran Church locally. And they have, very kindly, transcribed all of the cemetery records for their cemetery. They're in a PDF file. You have to go into their website, find the file, and open it up. It's not indexed anywhere. And Peter Myers died in 1859, not 1839. I don't know if you can read it clearly here, but this is a close-up of the tombstone. And that's a 5. That's not a 3. Okay? But 755 researchers have all swallowed the same story and repeated 1839. It's been put that way on Find a Grave. So if you go to Find a Grave, that's what it's going to say. If you glance at the tombstone, that's what it's going to say. It just happens to be wrong. This is why you look at as many original records as you can. So what we have to do is look at Peter Myers and possible known or likely siblings in Frederick. So When you go to find a grave and look at his grave, you find his wife and children, no parents. 1850 census, it says he was born in Maryland and lived in Buckystown, Frederick County, which shows up in some indexes as Buckeye. 1840, he's age 40 to 49. And nearby is David Fortney. What did we say Rebecca's maiden name was? Fortney. And 1830, there he is. Another male living with him at age 20 to 29. Well, that's not going to be a child. That's going to be a brother, either his brother or her brother. And on the same page, a few people away is David Fortney. 1820 census, there is a Peter Myers who's over 45 years old with two males, 16 to 25. And those could easily be Peter and the male who's living with him 10 years later. So when I did a research on Family Search, they pulled up a marriage between George Myers and Mary Fortuley, which had been part of a document that was printed, and this is indexed from that document. Nobody's gone into the original records. From the Evangelical Lutheran Church. Okay, well, sounds like we got our people. I mean, this is Lutheran Church. And isn't it interesting? George Myers, that could easily be Mary Fortnoy. Maybe we're talking brother and sister marrying. So, turns out that the Lutheran Church has a tremendous website, lots of good data. And we can find 3 of Peter and Rebecca's children being baptized there. And we can find the marriage between George Myers and Mary Fortney. Here it's spelled correctly. So, okay. Okay, so what I did was I searched for marriages in Frederick County, okay? And one of the things that popped up was the database for evangelical church records. And I said, well, evangelical Lutheran sounds pretty good to me. So I pulled up that top document. That gave me the name of the church. Then I went on the web and just searched the name of the church and found their website, which is very beautiful. They say they're the oldest evangelical Lutheran church in the country. So after I went on the website, if you continue on the website, it takes you to where they have their genealogical research database. But it's not a database, it's a set of PDF files that you have to open up and read, okay? So we have George and Mary, married in 1833. So that's very promising. That says that George could easily have been living with Peter in the 1830 census, okay? That makes sense. So is George the male living with Peter? Is Mary Rebecca's sister? Can't answer those for sure, but pretty promising. Is the Peter in 1820 the father of George and Peter? And if George is living with Peter in 1830, does that imply the father is dead? Those are all future research projects, but they're promising. And what I did do is look at the elder Peter, and through the 4 censuses, you can see he sort of makes his way through there, okay? Or the person who's likely to be him makes his way through there. And were he the person from Adams County, we have a birth record with his parents. And I don't know why, but on one thing I was searching, this popped up, which is even the, this is the plot of land owned by Petrus's father, Nicholas. So just for fun. Okay, so I'm almost certain Peter Myers was likely the son of a Peter Myers, as was his brother George. Although that's where I would research with that as a hypothesis, but I wouldn't necessarily guarantee that. It is possible it's that Peter Myers from Adams County, but to be honest, there are other people with that name of about the right age who show up in Adams County later, and all of Nicholas's male children, not named Peter, end up staying in Adams County. So, but he's definitely not the son of the Peter Myers who's buried in Carroll County. So that's that one. Okay. Peggy, you on? Okay, who was Movshenko Minkin's wife? This is a failure. Couldn't buy anything. For this kind of research, we know that Movshenko Minkin was born in 1860 in the area known as Mogilev in Belarus. His wife's name is recorded in the death of her son Shlomo in 1932 in Chicago as Mary. And I think we can safely say Mary is unlikely to have been the actual name in Ukraine, I mean in Belarus. So anything like this, we're going to use Jewish Gen. Jewish Gen is a marvelous website that is growing rapidly. It, by the way, has information that's of use if your family is not Jewish. One of the ones that I've used is it has alternative names for the villages that were in the Eastern European area. So if I think about where my wife's grandfather came from, the village he came from had a Russian name, a Polish name, a Lithuanian name, and a Jewish name. And they weren't the same. They were wildly different. When I first tried to compare one of his documents with one of his brother's documents, the two names were so different. I said, they can't be the same person, same family. Until I looked them up in Jewish Gen and said, oh, my wife's grandfather used the Jewish version. His brother used the Lithuanian version. Got it. Okay, we searched the Mogilev gubernia. Well, the way that works, they have a couple of different databases. This is the one that's uniquely for Belarus. You put in a surname. You can actually put in other factors if you want to. You pick what you want. I picked the Mogilev gubernia. Gubernia is like state, okay? So the region. And we searched the database, hoping I'd find something that Peggy hadn't found, but I didn't. But I was able to get two data points of interest. The first was Shlomo's marriage, okay, which shows Moshe Yankel as his father. And the second line where the two dots are, that's the name of his mother, meaning we don't have it. And that's common. Most of these records do not have the name of the mother. Okay. Later on, we have Moshe's second marriage after his first wife died. Okay. So this is, we have also other marriages in the same database. So I can confirm things that Peggy had found, but I was unable to find anything to give us a hint as to who the wife really was. Well, look at age. Does age work? That's 1856. Well, we can talk about it. Okay. I thought it was, but who knows? Okay. I'm being told I'm on the wrong track. All right. All right. Are there any questions on the brick walls from the Zoom audience? Okay, for those who are willing to hang around, I am going to spend the next 10 minutes in honor of my son-in-law's father, Kalman Held. Kalman died on the 2nd of September this year. He was a Holocaust survivor. This is a picture of him. He lived in Atlanta. He was born in what is Chernovitz, Romania, which is now part of Ukraine. In 1941, the Soviets explained to the Romanian government that they thought it would be a good idea if this part of Romania became part of Ukraine. And the Romanian government said, sure, why not? They no more than took over, then they took the community leaders, particularly the Jews, arrested them and sent them to Siberia, where they were never heard from again. I have read one story that suggests they went out and were the people who were asked to dig the trenches in front of Stalingrad that the Russian troops were going to use to fight off the Germans. When we do research in a place like Eastern Europe, you got to sort of get your mind around the idea that the borders changed dramatically. In this particular case, the records for Chernovitz are shown with Bukovina, which is the larger area, the Guberna, okay, and are located with the Romanian records, not with the Ukrainian records. So you have to look them up there. So Held is the last name, Romania, Bukovina. Once again, we get a long set of records. Without taking you into it, the Yizkor necrology database, this is in remembrance of those who died. Necrology and the word Yizkor is basically remembrance. And they remember Gustav Held, who was Hal's father. And that's a picture of him in the bottom left. Now, if you'll take a minute while I get this lined up. There we go. Hard to believe I put myself through college in part by typing. Okay, can you all hear this? No, I'm going to share this.
Well, I remember dimly attending temple, a high hall father. He had a dry goods store, a very successful dry goods store, and he and my uncle Zygmunt actually were running that store. I remember some of my relatives having left in 1938 for Palestine.
I don't know how to get rid of the echo.
But my father, having been an officer in the Austro-Hungarian army, didn't believe that anything will happen to him, and besides, he wanted to continue in business, and as such, he stayed on. I remember being tutored to some degree at home. I remember a very nice apartment, and I remember the Russian army capturing the city, which I don't remember what year it was, at which point uh, two other families were bivouacked in our apartment. I remember my father being taken away by the Russians and my mother going to jail every day. But afterwards, the city was captured by the Germans, and my mother and I and my grandmother moved into a much different apartment or room where they were making, I remember them sewing the Jewish star, the yellow star, which we had to wear. I actually remember being sent to movie theaters because the teacher that was teaching me, his son-in-law or somebody was running this movie theater, and I saw these Italian movies most of the time. But things turned worse. I remember my grandmother being ill. I remember my mother having to be constrained with ropes as a result of the fact that she was bleeding all over her body because of nerves and because of the fact that my father had to be taken away.
This continues. I've got about 5 more minutes.
Whomever he was. And also there were a lot of bombardments by American bombers. And at that point I got scarlet fever and I almost died. And I also remember that they got a doctor to see me because I think I was like a skeleton from this disease. And I remember my mother telling me not to pull my pants down so the doctor will not know that I was Jewish. Well, at a certain point, we all went by train to the harbor by the name of Constanza. And it was also my uncle and his daughter and his mother-in-law. Now the question is, what happened to his wife, my uncle's wife? Well, what happened was something very, very sad. She too, in the presence of her husband, took up with a Romanian retired officer. And as a result of that liaison, as they were going by car, that officer shot her dead in front of her husband because he was actually in love with her. Her name was Tilly. I don't think that my cousin, her name is Pnina, she lives in Israel, was fully aware of it because she was 4 years younger than I at the time. But we wound up on a boat, on a Bulgarian boat, that took us to then Constantinople. And there wasn't that much food on the boat, but that wasn't so serious. We then were put on a cattle train of some sort and wound up in Aleppo, Syria.
Okay, I'm going to stop there. He then went on to live in Israel, where he was raised in a kibbutz. And then in the early 1950s, found a family in Toronto that sponsored him coming to the Americas. And the sister of the wife of that family was a matchmaker. And she had this great niece who lived in Miami. And that's where that's my son-in-law's mother. So thank you for putting up with that. This as a reminder of a very difficult period. Yeah. The name of the book again. Can you spell that for me? Oh, Tehran, like Tehran in Iran. Okay, the book is Tehran Children, and it deals with the. I'm hitting this for the Zoom people who won't have heard you. I'm hitting this for the Zoom people. They would not have heard what you said. Okay, so the recommendation was a book of a reference here is Tehran, Tehran Children. Okay. The author of that book will be speaking in March about that book here for the Jewish Interest Group. Okay. Well, that's the meeting for today with our kind family history help here. Next meeting will be on if you want to put your family tree on the family history, family tree site, what that involves, how to manage it, just what it's all about. That'll be what that's on. And then that's in October. And our November meeting is if you have fairly recent European ancestry, it is possible that you can get dual citizenship. And so we will have a speaker who is going to talk about how to get your Italian or Polish or whatever citizenship if you have the necessary linkages. So that should be interesting. She's also going to touch on the Sephardic Jewish issue. If you're not aware, the Sephardic Jews, there is a return right that Spain and Portugal have given to descendants of Sephardic Jews. So that if you, I don't know what level, she'll explain to us, but at some level of your ability to prove your descendancy, you would be able to obtain Spanish or Portuguese citizenship, which is also sort of interesting. On the Sephardic side? Hmm? Yeah, most of these take a while. It's not something you do if you want to go to Europe next week. Okay. Would you remember to pencil down our November meeting? Pencil down the November meeting. Okay. Okay. Thank you all. We'll see you in October. Oh. Okay. Thank you all.